Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Energy Matters. I am here as always with my co-host David.
Hello, hello. Great to be here.
It is good to be here. We're very excited to share our guest with you today. We have Dan Brulé, who is an author. Here's his book. And a breathwork specialist. He's the world's foremost expert on and renowned pioneer in the field of breathwork. And I wanted to start off today just by reading something that jumped out at me in your book. It's kind of the first thing in here, Dan, and it's a review that I thought was really great about your book. It says, "This is a timely and essential book for our challenged world. Dan Brulé is a true master and deeply inspiring. Just breath is free medicine that will not only bring your optimal health, but also expand your consciousness." And that was written by Mark Divine, who's a Navy SEAL and a best-selling author about, high performance. I think his book is Unbeatable Mind. I thought that was really great to hear that breath work is kind of being used in not just the military, but people that are really at a high level of performance and, working with their bodies and their mind. And I didn't even realize until I kind of got into your book that Mark Divine is kind of spiritual too, in the realm of kind of who he is. So anyway, welcome and hello. And it's kind of funny that I had picked that where I wanted to start just by highlighting that, because you are actually at Annapolis on the naval base and bringing some breath work and information to them. So maybe tell us just a little bit about your day.
Yes. Well, first about Mark Divine, I mean, there is a guy, who's been in the fire, and, that community that he's in, they're not into a lot of woo-woo stuff. If it doesn't work, they're not interested in it,
Right.
And if it works in that high stress, life and death situations and atmospheres, then for us, for our everyday stuff, wow, it's pretty much guaranteed to produce some life-changing results. And yes, I visited the Naval Academy. I was stationed across from the Naval Academy back in 1970, my first assignment in the military, in the Navy. And so it was really kind of nice to come full circle back there some 48 years later or whatever, and find how, 40 years ago, I felt like a voice crying out in the desert, just shouting from the rooftops, and nobody was listening. And but the science has caught up, and breath work has become, it's the tool of our day. It's the new yoga. It's meditation for people who can't meditate. Mm-hmm. And interesting about this spiritual aspect of Mark, one of the things he confirmed, I kind of been observing it for quite a while, that the most spiritual people I've ever met have been the most conscious. And the most conscious people I've ever met have been the most spiritual. So maybe there's no difference between being spiritual and being conscious. And so, yeah, I loved working with Mark, especially in his first session, because he had been practicing box breathing. I don't know if viewers know about box breathing. You call square breathing also. Inhale, pause, exhale, pause, inhale, pause, exhale, pause. And it's all about control. Control the inhale, control the pause, control the exhale, control the pause. Because in that, first responders, special forces, Navy SEALs, control is everything. You have to control your arousal. You have to control your impulses. You have to manage your mental state, your emotional state. You got to control your weapon. You got to control the environment. It's all about control. And box breathing that's perfect for that, because you regulate the inhale and the exhale, which regulates the sympathetic and parasympathetic branch of the nervous system. You're holding and pausing the breath, which gives you a felt sense of being in control, because, well, you are in control in those moments. And so it's a perfect breathing technique for that arena. But the piece that I see, is missing is the letting go, the surrendering, the getting out of the way and allowing something. And so the very first session, which made Mark a real believer when we met, was just introducing this little piece of just letting go on the exhale, rather than controlling it, just letting go, and eliminating the two pauses so the breath is more circular and connected. So the inhale merges with the exhale, and the exhale merges with the inhale. And it only took them 5 minutes before I could start to see something happening. And pretty soon there was, it was ecstatic expression and tears rolling from this, this amazingly powerful guy. And when he got up, he nailed it. He said, wow, I got it. He said, the power is about control. The control is about power. And the peace is about relaxation. The relaxation is about peace. And that combination of peace and power, it makes you the most dangerous guy on the battlefield. You're totally charged and alert and awake and completely calm and at peace. There isn't a better state. I don't know if humans can discover a better state, because from there, all the higher states open up to us.
Wow. And so, Dan, for someone listening to this going like, okay, what if I'm in like a high anxiety, high stress situation where I'm really nervous? What would your advice be for them what would they do with their breath in that moment? Would it be a box breathing, or would it be 4 or 5 seconds in and then straight away 4 or 5 seconds out?
I have people play with the triangle, the square, and then the circle. So a triangle is actually nature's way of breathing us. It's hardwired as a breathing pattern. It's inhale, exhale, pause. Inhale, exhale, pause. And so when we breathe consciously in that pattern, we're coming into harmony with our nature. And that pause after the exhale needs to be a comfort zone. It's like coming home. And so consciously breathing in that pattern immediately starts to bring us into a physiological state, which is the nervous system recognizes it, the brain recognizes it, it fits and it suits how we're already hardwired to breathe. And then depending on the situation, we either move into a square or move into a circle. Continuous breathing, connected breathing, or injecting those pauses to give yourself a sense of being in control. And that question reminds me of a really great teacher, one of my early teachers and students, Robert Gerzon, who had a book back in the late 70s called Finding Serenity in the Age of Anxiety. And he said anxiety is composed of 3 chords, 3 threads that comprise a single chord. And there are 3 types of anxiety. And the first is natural anxiety. It's, I got a promotion at work. I'm on a first date. I'm about to lift off on a downhill ski. I should be nervous. I should be feeling anxiety. That's energy to perform. And the second kind of anxiety he calls toxic anxiety. And that's caused by that critical voice, what's wrong with me? Why can't I do anything right? Oh, I don't think I can make it. What if this happened? And that creates a different kind of anxiety. And the third thread he called sacred anxiety. And it's connected to the big questions in life. Who am I? Why am I here? Where did I come from? What happens when I die? Those big, deep questions that cause a certain kind of sacred anxiety to motivate us to evolve, to awaken, to grow, to become self-realized. And so that question of anxiety, I would answer, well, what kind of anxiety is it? Identify the kind of anxiety it is, and then the response would be according to, what you've identified. If it's sacred anxiety, bring it on, go over the top with it, invite more and more energy and relax into it and see what it breaks open in you.
Beautiful.
If it's toxic anxiety, you need to do, what Tony Robbins teaches. You change your focus, you change your internal self-talk, and you change your physiology if you want to change your state, change your posture, change your breathing, change the expression on your face, change what you're thinking about, what you're focusing on, and change what you're telling yourself, and you'll move out of the anxiety state.
Speaking of Tony Robbins, Dan, he seems like he's learned a lot from you. He wrote the foreword to your book. He wrote some really nice things on the back about you. And what is it like actually working with Tony and being around him. What's your experience with him? Because we had a guest on recently, John Amaral, who works with Tony, and he's a chiropractor, and he has some fascinating things to say. And we want to know what was your experience with Tony?
Yeah. Well, Tony's a lifelong student, and he's a saint in a suit. And he's done so much work on himself, and he's so conscious, and he's like the ever-ready bunny. He's got no off button. And he refuses to show up less than 100%, whether he's having a meal or a conversation or on stage. He just refuses to show up less than 100%. And he's making such a difference in the world. I mean, 50 million people have been influenced by him, and he feeds millions of people every year. He's doing things to people are never going to hear about. How can you not want to serve somebody like that?
Yeah. How does Tony Robbins breathe on stage? Have you gone over that with him?
Well, if you've ever done a Tony Robbins event, you don't go more than 15 minutes of listening to information before you get up and you jump up and down and you shout and you get all your energy going, and then you sit down again and you absorb more information and you get up and you jump. So obviously his breathing, his preference for breathing exercises matches his style and his way. So he's very powerful breather.
I love that.
And so, but it's all public information. He had that pituitary tumor, which is responsible for that growth spurt, hormone growth hormone thing. And that comes with very predictable, if not guaranteed, issues right about, midlife. And doctors have no real good prognosis. And so, we say, I'm Tony freaking Robbins. I'm going to find my way out of this. I don't care what the prognosis is. And so he's willing to try anything and do anything. And as soon as he learns something, he pulls somebody into the room and has to teach it to them. I just love that about him.
So has he pulled you into something and be like, hey, Dan, I got to show you this?
Yeah, we text pretty regularly. And his latest thing is the stem cell. He went to some clinic in Panama and decided to partner with the doctor and build another clinic, I think in Florida or someplace. So, he just keeps growing and evolving. And but how can you not be Tony Robbins? So our work is like minute vacations. He can't fit one more thing onto his schedule for the next 2 years. I mean, he's overflowing with. And so if you only have 5 minutes or 2 minutes, how can you make the best use of that to drop down as deep as possible, to recharge yourself as much as possible in the shortest amount of time? And so that's kind of our game at this point, the art of minute vacation. So you get so damn good, you can just take a couple of breaths and you get what most people would get out of a few days on the beach in the Bahamas. And you can manage it with just a few conscious breaths. And so that's
slow it down. I just want to plug your book, Dan, with Tony's words. He said, breath is the ultimate key to your well-being, and Just Breathe is the definitive breathwork handbook. And here it is. So that's what Tony has to say on the back of it, the definitive breathwork handbook.
And he recorded his introduction. He wrote that introduction to the book, and he recorded it for the audio version.
Wow.
Grateful, to the guy. And our relationship is developing, and we're playing with a few things, and it's just an exciting guy to have in your life,
I can only imagine.
So, Dan, I have a question that maybe takes us back a step in as far as for most of us, we know that breath and breathing is something we notice in meditation. We kind of observe our breath, and we kind of have an awareness of it. But in terms of how would you define what is breath work? And what are some of the pillars or foundations of it? Years ago, I did something called rebirthing a few times. That's my only encounter with kind of conscious breath work. And that leads you down a certain path, and it has certain things you're specifically working toward. It's pretty intense. My experience was with it. But how would you define that, the idea of breath work beyond just kind of breathing, you know?
Yeah, well, I was one of the early guinea pigs in the rebirthing movement. You know, we didn't know what the heck was happening,
Right.
except that if you breathe in a certain way, all kinds of things happen. And you breathe yourself right into a knot, and then you kind of breathe yourself out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And session after session, it's like layers clear away. Beautiful. It still is one of my basic core techniques,
Mm-hmm.
core methods. And it involves some of the fundamentals. So I see breath work as having two main aspects, like yin and yang aspects, active and passive aspects, doing and being aspects, right? So the first is breath awareness. Well, you don't breathe in any way at all. You don't do the breathing. You don't control the breathing. You simply allow the breath to come and go by itself. Allow yourself to be breathed. Allow the breath to breathe you, and you're just a witness. So we're practicing mindfulness. We're practicing breath awareness. It's what the Buddha was doing when he became the Buddha. And so it's very powerful. And most people have the kind of consciousness that disturbs nature. When we go into the forest, our presence disturbs nature. The birds, the animals, the deer, they're scattering. And so, but if we learn to sit still and be quiet, all those animals come back and they resume their natural activities. And so when we turn our attention to the breath, and I tested several thousand people's because we're monitoring their breathing, and then we tell them, okay, I'd like you to focus on your breathing right now. In every single case, or 99% of the time, as soon as we put our attention on the breathing changes. And so my lesson in that was, oh, wow, we disturb our own nature. And it's the kind of consciousness that we have, judging, resisting, analyzing, comparing, projecting, all that stuff. It kind of pollutes what we want to develop, and that is something like pure awareness, detached witnessing. And when we develop that kind of awareness, all kinds of things open up to us. So the practice of breath awareness is just that. It's developing the ability to simply observe the breath and not disturb it. And then we learn things from the breath itself. And so that's breath awareness, the passive part. The second part of breath work is conscious breathing. This is where we come in. We breathe in a certain way. We give the breath a certain pattern. We breathe with a certain intention. We do the breathing. And so breath work is going back and forth between those two aspects. And under conscious breathing, there are thousands of breathing techniques. If you want to breathe for this and you want to breathe for that, then you can breathe in this way and breathe in that way. And combine movement with breath, combine visualization with breath, breathe in certain rhythms, a certain rate, breathe high in the chest, breathe low in the belly, breathe through your nose, breathe through your mouth. So we start to play with the breath, and we trust our nature. And so I teach people to train in two directions. You train in the direction of comfort. What's just interesting to you? What's enjoyable? What's pleasurable? And breathe that way and go and train in that direction. Nature wouldn't fool with us. It's not an accident or coincidence that you find a certain breathing pattern interesting or enjoyable. But I also encourage people to train in the direction of challenge. If we stay in our comfort zone, we're never going to grow. So we have to find, what are your limits? And you play with the different parameters of breathing, and you find your limits and you lean into them, and you use the breath to grow your comfort zone, to evolve, to ascend, to awaken to more of who we are and our potential,
That's beautiful. Speaking of limits, Dan, Wim Hof, he's
I get to smile when I think of that guy. I just love
he's
such
so
a
genuine.
I love him.
We teach on an app together called Insight Timer, and he has this awesome, for those of you listening who don't know, Wim Hof has this awesome 30-day course on Insight Timer. That's pretty neat. So he's climbed Everest in his shorts. I think he's sat under ice for 2 hours and raised his body temperature. He has over 20 Guinness Book of World Records. records, and he's just, is he a, one, do you know him? And two, is he a freak of nature, or can that truly be learned?
Yeah, I mean, his method is positive psychology. As he says, man, you got to believe you can do this shit, you know? and breathing. And he has a particular technique, really beautiful, and gradual exposure to colds. And that combination, you got to grow. When you hyperventilate, he doesn't like to call it hyperventilation because hyperventilation has kind of a negative context in a lot of worlds, but it's hyperventilation. When you hyperventilate, you generate a package of feelings and sensations and emotions and reactions in your system. And if you can relax into them, you grow, you heal. And when you hold your breath, you bring up a whole different package of feelings and sensations and emotions and reactions. And if you relax into them, you heal, you grow. So it's an ancient technique. It's a yogic approach, hyperventilation, breath holding, hyperventilation, breath holding. And he's formulated it into a very simple step-by-step process that it's impossible to practice it without getting some benefit. And that's true of thousands of breathing exercises and techniques. If you have anything like a normal mind or a normal body, when you breathe in a certain way, you're going to trigger certain things. And so, yeah, I love the guy. And I look at it like an artist. You know, some people have learned the Wim Hof method, or they've learned a different style, or they've been to a different school, or they have a particular technique they practice. And for me, that's like an artist. And you have one color on your palette. Wouldn't it be nice to add another dozen colors to that palette? And as an artist, what can you now create? So I love working with people like Wim and his students of people like that, because if you've gotten in the door and you've gotten benefits from one way of breathing, you're probably going to be open to discovering a different approach, a different angle, a different level, maybe sometimes more subtle things. And so, yeah, we're all doing our part to just wake the world up to the spirit of breath. And
that's right.
And I think that's our purpose here.
And it seems like the power of breath. You know, to hear you talk about him, it makes me think of something you said in the book, which is so obvious, and I've never even thought of it, which is that breath is the only system in the body that's both automatic and under our control. And it's like, when I read that, I kind of had this thought of, is that like the doorway to then control other systems of the body? Because it is the only one that we have direct control over.
Yeah, that's not an accident of nature. That's not a coincidence that the breath is completely automatic and completely under our control. That's an opportunity. That's an invitation to take part in our own evolution, to take part in our own nature. And humans are the only creatures on this planet that can be unnatural, right? Humans can be inhuman. You can't say that about a dog. A dog can just be a dog, you know? Yeah. But that's a two-edged sword. If we can be inhuman or unnatural, we can be supernatural. We can be superhuman. It's the other edge of that sword. And so, yes, breathing is the key to unlocking all kinds of potential. We all know we have deep inner potential and amazing abilities, and how do we access them? That's the game, right?
And Dan, you talk about spiritual breathing as well. That was a pretty cool part of your book that I was getting into. And you know, all the traditions of the world, in India they call it prana, which you have training in, right? And I lived in Hawaii for many years, and in Hawaii they call it mana, which is one letter off. I always found that incredibly fascinating. Is it in Hebrew? They call it ha. What tradition is that? Oh, in Hawaiian, excuse me, they also call it ha, the spirit in like aloha, the spirit in the breath.
And they call the first white missionaries howlies, which means
breath.
People who don't breathe, breathless, without the breath.
Without the spirit.
they were very observant of these uptight, European missionaries.
Yeah, that's right. So I found it fascinating that in all traditions across the world, the spirit is inside the breath. And in like New Zealand, right, and in Hawaii, they put their noses together and they breathe in each other's breath. That's how they say hello. That's how they connect. What is your experience with that? I know you've traveled all over the world and have probably experienced this yourself firsthand. But well, first of all, what is spiritual breathing? If someone's listening to this and like, what do you mean by spiritual breathing? And how does that kind of correlate or connect to these traditions?
Yeah, I mean, I coined the term because it allows us, it supports us in connecting or reconnecting to our spirit, our essence. It's not a coincidence that the word spirit is at the root of respiration, inspiration, expiration. It's not an accident either. And when we bring a certain kind of consciousness to breath, it becomes a spiritual practice, a spiritual purification, spiritual awakening. And we are cooperating with our spirit, surrendering to our spirit, being co-creators with the spirit. And so, those photos, those pictures, what do they call them, magic eye or something, where they're all random geometric shapes, but if you focus your eyes in front or behind the picture, this 3D image pops up. Yeah. It's there all the time, but we have to do something with our focus before it pops up. Well, there's something on the feeling level that's very similar to that or identical. If we can do something with the way that we feel, the way that we sense, abilities in us just pop up, they just awaken. And breathing helps us to find our way to that. And a shortcut for people to understand just what is that practice. Anybody can breathe really deep and fast and powerful, but they don't relax. And when they relax, they don't breathe. And so the magic happens when you can combine powerful breathing and complete relaxation. Something happens that cannot happen any other way. You can't get to it from this way, and you can't get to it from that way. You have to get to it somehow by bringing both those ways together. Mm-hmm. And spiritual breathing it literally awakens something in us that we read about, we've read about, and other humans before us have attained or achieved. But it seems like every time somebody does that, we immediately put them up on a pedestal, or we separate them and go, oh, well, they can do it because they're the great Buddha, the great Jesus, but us, we're just little regular people. And so we got to shake off some of those limiting ideas and beliefs and stop projecting our own power onto others and assuming that it's somehow they're special. They're only special in terms that they've awakened to the same thing that's in all of us.
Mm. So just by breathing in the right way, we can start to awaken to our potential.
Yeah, I'm convinced. That's the synopsis of my book. The same high states and extraordinary abilities that the great saints and warriors and gurus and mystics and masters achieved, we can all achieve that stuff through the breath.
You hear that, Cody? You can do it. I've been trying to tell Cody he can do it, but he doesn't believe it.
Yeah. So Dan, I mean, to me, it sounds like you saw something about the breath, or you awakened to the power of it, when before others, because you were talking about, well, you've been doing this since what, the 70s? Since.
Yeah.
But what was your awakening? I mean, how did you wake up to this potential and this power and see beyond, what everybody else sees?
I'm the kind of person you have to hit over the head with a baseball bat before I kind of get it. Spirit knocks very quietly and you just don't hear and don't notice. It knocks a little louder and maybe you notice, but you ignore it until pretty soon it's just hammering on you and you just can't avoid and can't escape and can't ignore. And I guess I was one of those people. I had several near drowning experiences, and as a teenager, my first one, and I guess I had one very early in life when I was 3 or 4 years old, which I still don't completely remember. I have bits of it. And then again as a teenager, and then in the military, and I was literally, I was resuscitated. And
Wow.
so things kept happening in my life to make me focus on my breath. It wasn't like a choice, you know, it was, and it started in kindergarten, Catholic school, when the pastor of our church came to the class, and the first thing that impressed me is the nun came and sat with the kids. And that was like, oh my God, she was always way up there as this amazing, you know, and we were all, and when he came in the room, she became a little like the rest of us, and she was sitting with us. And I thought, whoa, wow, who is this guy? And he talked about the book of Genesis and how God formed the body of man from the dust of the earth and breathed into the nostrils of man the breath of life. That was the most exciting thing I had ever heard as a child, and I couldn't understand why everybody wasn't excited. It's like, wow, God is breathing into us? Wow. And so, I don't know, a seed was planted, you know, in an open, innocent mind, and so it was accidental.
That was kindergarten.
Somehow a divine plan. It wasn't my choice.
Wow. That was kindergarten.
That's pretty wild.
It took some of us a little longer, Dan.
Yeah.
You're on this planet 4 years. You're like, all right, let's get this thing moving here. Where's my spiritual awakening?
Oh, and hey, I was the kid in the schoolyard who was having breath holding contests, organizing them, you know. So, yeah, it's just it's a mission. It's you know, you're born with a certain purpose, and God bless, you know, those who realize that purpose or who are working to fulfill that purpose. I think because there's something in our heart that's never going to let us have peace until and unless we listen to that call. And that's one of the beautiful things about breathwork. It helps people hear that voice under all the stuff, programs and conditioning and fears and desires and ego stuff. Underneath all that is this quiet voice of the spirit. And if we can burn through all that stuff or clear all that stuff, you know, we end up doing the right thing at the right time without trying.
So, Dan, what if someone's listening to this, and probably more than many someone's, and they're going like, man, I didn't get a spiritual awakening over the head when I was 4 or 14 or 40. For those who are like, man, I don't know my purpose. How do you start to find that? You know, how do you kind of cut some of the jungle down to be able to see what's in the center of your heart, so you know why you're here? I mean, because it sounds like it came. Well, actually, it sounds like it came easy to you, and then it didn't. Like you had to get hit over the head, you said, with the baseball bat. So when it comes to that, like life's hitting you in the head, then what do you do?
You know, we catch it and then we lose it, and we catch it, and we lose it. We get a little hint of it, but then we miss it. So it's a process of coming into it. And there are 2 great motivators, right, for human motivators. Desperation. You just hit bottom. You just can't go another minute living a life that's not in harmony with who you are. And that desperation causes us to meet the right teacher, open the right book, practice the right technique. And it doesn't matter who the thing isn't the teacher or the book or the technique, it's our readiness. How do you create that readiness? Or what my friend Tony Robbins calls hunger. You know, when you're hungry enough, you're gonna wake up. And the other motivator is inspiration. You have this amazing life-changing experience that doesn't allow you to go back into unconsciousness. It doesn't allow you to go back to sleep. There's no going back after this amazing, beautiful, positive, inspiring experience. That's a preferable motivator, I think. And so breathing will do it. And so hanging around with people who are who are interested in the same game is really important. Choosing your company wisely, so you're not being supported and remaining unconsciously, but you're kind of being provoked to keep waking up. That's really useful. And then the willingness to just go for it. And breathing gives us the way. Hey, breathing is so simple. It's so easy. And you just keep turning it up. You keep playing with it. You get out to the edge of your comfort zone and you lean on it. Don't try to escape back into comfort. Tolerate the discomfort until your comfort zone grows. And so gradually, breathing session after breathing session, you're coming into more and more of who you fully are. And, the breath is like a thread. It takes us to our source. The source of breath is the source of life. And so if you follow the breath, it will take you to your source. And the other two aspects are meditation. Hey, millions of people have awakened before us through the practice of meditation. It works. If you meditate long enough, often enough, continuously enough, you're going to get a glimpse of this space of who we really are. It might take 10, 20, 30 years, but hey, it has benefits along the way and it's enjoyable. So meditation, meditative awareness is one of the elements in this formula. And the other is relaxation. So, there is a point beyond which we cannot relax. And as you relax and you get to that point, what happens? We go unconscious. And that always intrigued me, the fact that we literally go to sleep when we relax. The average person's reaction to relaxation is sleep. And so we're literally sleeping during the most profoundly relaxing moments of our life. And the first time you're awake and you experience that profound relaxation, everybody describes it as a peak religious experience. And so the breathing keeps us awake while we're relaxing, and something dawns on us.
That's really fascinating, Dan, because I was teaching a class last night, and there was a young woman in the front row, and she just went like this, just passed out for the whole thing. And then at the end, she got up, and there was a full room of people, but I kind of grabbed her at the end. I was like, hey, stay back for a moment. And I was like, hey, you know how you just got zonked out? She's like, yeah, that happens to me in almost every class that I'm in. I was like, well, that's a good sign. I was like, don't invalidate yourself for that. You're connecting your conscious to your unconscious. And when we do that, sometimes it knocks us unconscious. We go there and we fall asleep. And we're like you said, we equate relaxation to sleep. So it's like, keep going. I used to wear like a neck brace when I had to meditate, because my teachers would throw things at me because I would just keep nodding out because I couldn't become conscious of what I needed to become conscious of. And I feel like the breath was that bridge. Yeah. I would just like have whiplash.
Yeah. It's said that, if somebody falls off a 20-story building, they're unconscious before they hit the ground. We couldn't handle that intense experience, and nature makes us go unconscious. Well, maybe the biggest part of us is so intense that the same thing gets triggered. It's just too big for us to actually experience. And so the brain just shuts us off. It's trying to protect us from something so great, so grand, that's out of its realm, that it's a survival reaction. And, joy is very intense. Love is extremely intense. And if we don't breathe and relax into intensity, and that might be another shortcut of understanding what breathwork is. It's the art of learning to relax into intensity.
I like that.
That allows us to be awake in moments when the average person, their system would shut the lights off, and they would miss it.
They would miss it. Yeah. That's so fascinating. I think I've done that 1,000 times over. I've missed it.
You must be human.
So, Dan, can we ask about your own practice? Do you have a specific breathing style that you do every morning or every day, or a meditation style? Like, if everyone's like, well, what does Dan do?
Well, I breathe while I'm listening.
Yeah.
I become conscious of my breath while I'm listening, while I'm looking at things. I take conscious breaths in between things, before things, after things. I train myself to respond with my breath instead of react with my mind. Instead of my body reacting or my mind reacting, my breathing responds. And so we train ourselves to do that. Somebody says something that disturbs you. Take a breath. Something uncomfortable happens inside of you. Take a breath. You see something beautiful. Take a breath. Just begin to train your system to breathe in those moments when the body would react or the mind would react, and something's possible that wouldn't be possible otherwise. So I'm practicing what I preach. The very first moment when I become conscious in the morning, and I'm in that in-between state, I'm really not awake yet, but I know I'm waking, my first awareness goes to my breath. And it's become a partner, it's become a guide, it's become a constant companion. And it's like having an angel or spirit working with you all the time. And that takes practice. You know, when something uncomfortable happens, you know, we react with anger or fear or whatever. And when we can repattern our mind-body system and have our system respond by opening and expanding, which is an inhale, relaxing and letting go, which is an exhale, then we're meeting and we're greeting whatever arises in the most resourceful way. And so that I'm practicing that. And so when next time you look at a beautiful sunset, don't just look at it, breathe it in. Next time someone is speaking to you, don't just listen, breathe in the energy behind the words. Next time you touch something, don't just touch it and feel it, but breathe in this invisible energy that's connects us all, and start to awaken to the fact that, you know, we're some of the literally the actual molecules of air that the Buddha breathed, that Jesus breathed, that all the great saints and masters breathed, those same molecules that pass through their system are floating around out there, carrying information. And when we breathe in, we can be breathing in the essence of those beings and the source of life. And if we focus on that, and if that's our intention, then it starts to become real.
So respond with the breath instead of react with the mind. I love that.
I like that.
Exactly.
Don't forget that, Cody.
I'll write that
The mind
down.
is going to react. The body's going to react. And if you're normal, if you're alive, you know, the body will stop reacting when you're dead, and the mind will stop reacting when you're dead. So it's an intention to just teach the body a new response, so it has options and not just survival reaction. And maybe we can rise above those ancient. I mean, you know, we have programs running in us that were designed to keep us safe from a saber-toothed tiger. When was the last time any of us had to defend ourselves against a saber-toothed tiger? And yet we still have programs running. We need to shed those things. And every breath can be a prayer. What do you need to let go of? What do you want to bring into you? And you focus on it while you breathe, and the breathing becomes a prayer. And every breath can be a blessing. What kind of energy do you want to fill yourself with? What kind of energy do you want to send out into the world? And you use the breath to bless yourself and to bless others. You don't have to be the Pope or a saint to bless people. We all have a divine nature.
Yeah.
Dan, I was just going to say, Cody, Dan, when you talk about breathing, the image and the feeling that I get in my body is the way someone would talk about like hydrating with water. Like always, I get this.
I'm religious about breathing, no doubt about it.
It's just like making sure you're always consciously drinking water, because I always have a problem with drinking enough water and I get dehydrated. And every time you're talking, like it's almost like you're hydrating with oxygen. I love that.
And it's happening by itself, honestly. I mean, I practiced. When I started to feel tense, I would remember, okay, take a breath. Or if my bliss got dented and I started to get negative or low, I would deliberately and consciously breathe and uplift myself. And I just did that so often, and I practiced so much that my system took it on as a strategy, and it's doing it by itself. I don't even notice when my tension is rising up, but my breath catches it and comes in.
Wakes you back up.
That's for me.
It's like you're hydrating your consciousness when you bring that much attention and awareness to breathing. It's like,
and then I love that. And here's a meditation. Imagine your breath as liquid. And when you're breathing a liquid. That's a beautiful, imagine that while you breathe and see what happens. Divine nectar, it's real.
Yeah, that is very awesome. So, as I hear you talk about this, I mean, we're a little bit in the energy and divine realm, but in a practical sense, today, some of the things I'm hearing underneath this is a sense of managing our sympathetic nervous system versus our parasympathetic, and this stress response and the anxiety that people have these days, which is just out of control and overwhelming. And it sounds like the breath can really help with that. Are there certain techniques or certain things that you've discovered about, especially things like anxiety and panic attacks, but even just that whole, the body being in survival just by being confronted by the world we are in today, even though there isn't a saber-toothed tiger, there's worse things out there. There's advertisements and people wanting things from you.
Yeah. Well, one of the principles is that every emotional state, every psychological state, every emotional state, every spiritual state has a corresponding breathing pattern, an associated breathing pattern, a signature breathing pattern. And when our state changes, our breathing pattern changes. When I'm calm and peaceful, I breathe differently than when I'm angry and upset. We all know this. And if I go from a state of peace and calmness to a state of anxiety or upsetness, anyone can observe the changes in my breathing pattern. And the magic is that it's a two-way street. When we change our breathing pattern, we change our state. And there are certain breathing patterns that are associated with high, ecstatic, sublimely peaceful spiritual states. And when we breathe in those ways, our system has no choice but to move in that direction. So, we're identifying breathing patterns that are resourceful and supportive of who do I want to be? How do I want to be? Let's say I want to be joyful. Well, what is a joyful breath? How would a joyful person breathe? And make it up. There's no right answer up there. If peace is important, what is a peaceful breath? Breathe in a way that you feel or understand would be peaceful. And you'll do it. You'll get it. That the intention is enough. And so it's like discovering that you have another limb, an arm growing out of your back, and you never knew it was there, and suddenly you discover it and all the new things you can do with it. Once we discover the power and the potential of the breathing system, the breathing mechanism, and we start to play with it, we discover we can do all kinds of cool things.
Can I ask a very basic question?
Uh-oh, David froze. Too basic of a question.
Yeah.
I
froze right when I said that.
Yeah, you did.
Did you hear my whole question? The question was, should we be breathing out of our nose or out of our mouth?
Yes. Yeah, the nose is meant to breathe through. It has hairs that filter dust and mucous membranes that trap microscopic particles, and it's got turbinates that spiral the air. Why would nature want the air to be spiraling as it entered our lungs? So the nose is meant to breathe through. It warms the air. If the air's too cold, it cools the air. If the air's too warm. So yeah, the nose was meant to breathe through, but I can't speak through my nose. I can't laugh through my nose. I can't cry through my nose. And so I have to learn how to breathe through my mouth. Most people cannot breathe through their mouth without activating the fight or flight mechanism. The throat gets dry, they get uncomfortable, they get dizzy. Those are symptoms of a dysfunction. And so I encourage people to practice mouth breathing and relaxing and tolerating the feelings until they pop through something, until they get free of something. And so we teach people to do both and breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth, in through the mouth, out through the nose, in one nostril and out the other. And there's a beautiful teacher, Tathan Tunku, who taught, his original core technique was called Kum Nai relaxation. And his core meditation is what he calls equalizing the flow. So you divide the stream of breath in half going in and out the nose, half going in and out the mouth. And it's called equalizing the flow. So we want to breathe through both nose and mouth at the same time. And the mouth is a bigger opening and it has less resistance. So we do something with our teeth or our lips or our tongue to restrict the opening a little bit until it creates the equal resistance that already exists in the nose. And then the air is intelligent. It will divide itself equally if the resistance is equal in both passages. And that's a beautiful meditation. And so, yes, you breathe through the nose and you breathe through the mouth.
That's so cool. You write that down, Cody?
That's pretty cool, both and there. Speaking of breathing and breathing patterns, I have a question that you may or may not have a comment about, but these days it seems like there's a lot of sleeping disorders, which are really breathing disorders. And is there a correlation between, our conscious breath and doing breath work and healing that pattern? And what is that dysfunction? Because it seems prevalent in our society now. So I don't know if it has to do with our diet or our stress levels or what. What have you run across?
I mean, breathing dysfunctions go in one direction or the other. People either overbreathe and they're unconsciously overbreathing. They're blowing off too much CO2 and that just gets to be a habit. And so now there's this chronic overbreathing. Or the other direction is people hold their breath and they underbreathe. And that gets to be a chronic automatic pattern. And so sleep apnea, for example, which is one of the main sleep disorders or breathing disorders in sleep, basically breath holding at night. Well, I've never met anybody who suffers from sleep apnea who also doesn't suffer from waking apnea.
Right.
They're holding their breath during the day too.
Oh, fascinating. And
maybe if you stop holding your breath during the day, it'll stop happening at night. And so, it could be, and even the average person without any obvious sleep disorders or breathing disorders is holding their breath 100 times a day, 1,000 times a day. Just for a moment, putting a key in a door. I'm holding my breath. Trying to remember something. I'm holding my breath. Getting up from a chair. I'm holding my breath.
Right.
That's an emergency signal to the brain. And so we want to start catching ourselves when we're holding our breath and flow the breath in that moment. Open and expand and relax and let go in that moment. And our system, we're training the autopilot and it will take on a new way of operating through conscious breathing. So absolutely, we use conscious breathing to reprogram the autopilot so that we're not breathing in a way that's making our body think it's in danger. We're not breathing in a way that throws our chemistry out of whack. And so, it's a direct way of fixing so-called problems that you're going to need drugs or, an expert. And, we have healing abilities. We just need to play with them.
Yeah. It's funny, when I studied martial arts, breathing, of course, very important. And how much you hold your breath, when you're trying to do this extreme exercise is funny, to the point that our instructor always used to say, breathing while not required is highly recommended during class. Right?
Wow.
And I didn't know.
Keeping up is easier than catching up.
Yes.
And so it's like they say that about water. If you're thirsty and you drink you should have drank water sooner. And so if you're out of breath, you should have been thinking about your breathing sooner. Right.
Right. And that's exactly what would happen when you're working out and you hold your breath, is suddenly you are behind, and then you're gasping, and then you're out of breath, which then you lose all kinds of levels of control of your body and what you're doing. And it's kind of an interesting flow that has to be maintained.
Yeah. And I didn't know underbreathing was such an epidemic. I knew like climate change was an issue, immigration. I didn't know underbreathing was an issue that we all have to face as a society. But speaking of that, Dan, so since you're such a breath enthusiast, breath missionary, there's a lot of air on this planet that isn't good to breathe. And so, well, I guess a few questions with that. One, what do we do when we live in a place where the air isn't great? And there's so many people that live in places with bad air quality. There
is an energy in the breath, prana, chi, ki, spirit, whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. It's more powerful than any of the pollutants in the air. So when we can contact the energy in the breath, we don't have to worry about the pollutants in the air. You know, you'll stay away from areas intuitively that are dangerous to your health. And the other thing is teaching your system not to react. So if I take in some toxic energy and then I freeze or I get caught up or I tense, now that energy is trapped inside of me. But if I get really good at pulling in and immediately exhaling without a pause, without a gap, then things can come through me and they leave. End of story, no problem. It's only when we hold our breath and we get stuck or our mind starts to create a problem that now we have something we have to deal with and unravel. So that connected breathing pattern, the rebirthing breath, which you talked about, which is circular, connected breathing, mastering that technique, then we don't have to protect ourselves from negative forces anymore because they don't affect us as much. And then we can get into the trenches and work where it really happens. We don't have to avoid uncomfortable situations and avoid toxic people. And especially if you're a healer, you got to get into the dirt with them. And if you know how to clean yourself up, and that's what you teach people. If you know how to climb out of a hole, then you jump in a hole and you show people how to climb out. That's our work.
Beautiful.
Isn't the breath and the lungs one of the major detoxing systems in the body? Is that true? So
yeah. Like some 70% of metabolic waste is eliminated, toxins is eliminated through respiration. Just 3%.
So when we're not breathing correctly, we're not detoxing correctly then on a real physical level. Is that would seem true?
Exactly. Okay. Defecation, 3%. That's all we eliminate through defecation, 3% of our metabolic waste, 7% through urination, and 20% through perspiration. The remaining 70% is through respiration. And so if you think having a good bowel movement or working out from time to time, you got to think about breathing.
I spend way too much time on the toilet. I just come to the realization.
You're way too proud of yourself when you have a good bowel movement. You're more focused on
now. If you breathe well on the toilet.
Hey, I have fun with Buddhists a lot because, the Buddha happened to be sitting in the lotus position when he became enlightened. And so you got millions of Buddhists all sitting in the lotus position, hoping that it'll happen to them. And I also thought, what if he'd have gotten enlightened while he was sitting on the toilet? You'd have millions of people sitting on toilets, and you'd have statues of Buddhas on the toilet.
You just have golden toilets.
Golden toilets.
Yeah, you'd go to Thailand and just a big golden toilet. Well, on that note, we are
Let's leave your viewers with a real interesting image.
Just hold on to that image and breathe into it. Wow, Dan. We're definitely not out of breath, but we are out of time today. But I do want to, first of all, say thank you so much for being on the show. You're just incredible light on this planet, and the work that you've been doing for 40 years is just absolutely amazing. And it shows just from speaking to you, and you've touched the lives of millions of people. So I just want to honor you for that. So first of all, thank you. And if we were together, we could touch noses and breathe in each other's breath, maybe a future time.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And Dan's website is breathmastery.com. You can find all of his work there, and also his incredible book, which me and Cody have been reading all week. It's a little bright, but Just Breathe. Tony Robbins wrote the foreword, and it's a treasure, as you are, Dan. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Dan. And on your website, you have some downloadable things that help our breathwork things, right? Like tantric ones and stress ones. I saw a number.
Yeah. We have some free videos, and I publish a newsletter. I've written a monthly report on breathing every month since June of 1976. I haven't missed a month.
Wow.
So there's archives there of articles going back, 30 years. So
wow,
lots of stuff to douse around and find. And people send an email. I manage to answer. I can still manage to answer just about all my emails. So anybody who's genuinely interested and is actually practicing something, I'm here to serve.
You're available. Oh, that's awesome. I love it.
I wish I could say the same.
I know, me too. I want some of that motivation.
David, no live here anymore. Just kidding. Well, thank you so much, Dan. Dan Brulé here, everybody. Thanks for listening to Energy Matters. Breathe slowly, breathe deeply.